Mr. Speakers, thanks for that, Paul. Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and parliamentary colleagues. This is my first official engagement since the atrocities in Manchester last night, and I think also His Excellency's first official engagement since those atrocities. I therefore ask you to please join me in showing our solidarity with the people of Manchester and the United Kingdom by commencing this evening with a 1-minute silence. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, last night the world once again witnessed a horrific act of terrorism play out across our television screens. Many of us woke this morning to be greeted by the images of tragedy playing out on the streets of the great city, which is Manchester. That great northern powerhouse was scarred forever by an attack that killed children and young people indiscriminately. It is incredible to think that it is only 60 days since the attack on Westminster by a lone terrorist. Yet every time we see the effects of an attack, we're rightly horrified by the human toll. Every time we hear of an atrocity, I feel how in Gibraltar, and no doubt in each of your home nations, we collectively recoil and brace ourselves in horror. And yet every time we know it will not be the last time. For it's clear that there is a collective madness that has gripped some in our society. A collective madness that leads people to kill in order to cause terror. As if terror will persuade or cajole the rest of us to give up our freedoms, to surrender our beliefs, or to change our values. Well, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that we will not. When the Irish Republican Army terrorized British citizens in pursuit of their armed struggle, it did not change the British people. It galvanized us against the cause of a united Ireland by the barrel of a gun. When the ETA terrorists pursued their objectives through violence in Spain, killing innocents in supermarkets and airports, it did not persuade the people of Spain. It horrified them and alienated them from the cause of Basque independence secured by explosion and extortion. When Al-Qaeda used aircraft as weapons, killing thousands one day in the United States of America, it did not cajole the world into accepting the precepts of fundamentalist Islam. It moved every man and woman on the planet who believes in democracy to an understanding that the sword, the gun, and the bomb are not replacements for the pen, debate, and the word in the art of persuasion. Yet there are still terrorists in the world. Now, more likely deployed as lone wolves, hoping to avoid increasingly sophisticated methods of detection. Have we changed? Are we more afraid? Perhaps as we watch our screens and clutch our children nearer, but not in the way in which we live our lives. Our law enforcement agencies, our security services, our armed forces, they ensure that we are and that we feel safe. They do so because we, the parliamentarians representing the democracies on planet Earth, give them the legislative authority to do so. That is what our people wish us to do. We're elected to manage our national affairs, and the first responsibility of government is to ensure the security of our citizens. That is why my government will shortly be publishing bills for acts to provide for counter-terrorism and the regulation of investigatory powers. Because a modern world unfortunately requires modern legislation granting modern powers to law enforcement and security agencies that effectively allow them the tools to do the job we expect from them. But this is no war on terror. We must not allow ourselves to fall into the trap of thinking that we're facing an army of terrorists with which we are at war. It is actually increasingly a small band of deranged individuals who deserve the utter derision and contempt of all Democrats around the planet. We are in a struggle for sanity. And as the voice of those democracies that elect representatives by direct universal suffrage, we must stand up and be counted in that struggle. Our role is also to ensure that there is no glamour or other attraction which might persuade anyone to take the side of the murderers. In Gibraltar, we've not been untouched by terrorism. In 1988, Irish Republican terrorists planned an attack on the Rock. The then British Prime Minister gave authority for military assistance to the civilian law enforcement agencies in dealing with what appeared to be an imminent threat to life. Rightly so. There can be no other way. Today's Gibraltar, however, is very different to the one you might see if you care to YouTube the grainy footage of the then notorious Death on the Rock documentary. The level of prosperity we enjoy in Gibraltar today is the achievement of successive generations of Gibraltarians working to build a small but proud Mediterranean nation. Our economy is today stronger than ever. Unemployment is at record lows. Our public debt is lower than it has been for years, falling every year since we formed government. More companies are seeking licenses to operate in financial services than before the Brexit referendum. More companies are seeking licenses to operate in the online gaming industry than before the referendum. And more individuals and companies are relocating to Gibraltar. Indeed, Gibraltar is now the only part of the continental European geography to which it is certain that a British citizen will be able to relocate after Brexit. And we are the only jurisdiction in Europe from which it is established that there will be free movement of services into the UK after Britain leaves the European Union. And the weather isn't bad either. Not a bad proposition for business. We have nonetheless also secured a long-term investment in Gibraltar via government-owned companies, which provides a war chest to manage any unexpected post-Brexit turbulence. Although I predict that we will not have to ask our people to fasten their seatbelts quite yet. Indeed, we expect to be in a position to declare, once again during the course of our appropriation debate this year, a healthy surplus, a very healthy surplus in fact, in respect of our estimates of expenditure for the coming financial year. We have achieved that in the context of being one of the smallest jurisdictions in the world. A jurisdiction which needs to operate in the proper context of its size. A parliament of 17 cannot operate with the committees and procedures of a parliament of 650. That is why, as soon as I was elected as Chief Minister, I established a commission on democratic and parliamentary reform. The commission was chaired by our Speaker and former Chief Minister, Adolfo Canepa, who was leader of a political party unaffiliated to my own. It included 2 former parliamentarians, both of them former government ministers, from parties also unaffiliated to my own, as well as the now chairman of the political party we face in opposition, himself also a Queen's Counsel. That commission has made a number of recommendations. Many have already been adopted. Some are to be considered in a select committee, which I expect will shortly start its work. Some conclusions and recommendations may surprise you. But please do consider the work we do in our 17-member parliament must be bespoke to the reality of this jurisdiction. For example, the commission reported that there is no need, and this is a direct quote, to establish a general purpose standing committee or a public accounts committee, given that opposition members have every opportunity to examine government expenditure in detail, as well as debating the report from the principal auditor on the government accounts for every financial year. That may seem anathema to a Westminster politician operating in a parliament in permanent session with 500 members who are not in the executive. But we must understand always that the success of the Commonwealth is in its diversity. That means the differences between us, which enrich our relationship, so long as they are based on the same values and freedoms we all believe in. There is no point talking about diversity and then not understanding that our parliaments must perforce be different in adapting themselves to the reality of the communities that we serve. And we must start looking at our different parliamentary models, no less democratic or transparent one from the other, and understanding our differences. For that is how we can be instruments of democracy and prosperity, and not tyrants imposing a one-size-fits-all model which doesn't work for all. That is how we ensure that the Westminster system, the adversarial and party political model, continues to deliver even in a place as small as Gibraltar. And that is why my government changed the frequency of our parliamentary timetable so that our parliament now meets each month for questions, including questions to the Chief Minister. Before, we met less frequently and perhaps not more than twice a year, as required by our constitution in election years. And that is how, therefore, we now deliver prosperity even in the teeth of a decision which we did not wish, namely the decision that we should leave the European Union. Not by avoiding democratic debate, but by embracing it. For that is how we opposed to make a success even of this difficult juncture, by working with the United Kingdom to give effect to the democratically expressed will of the British people, including the people of Gibraltar, by working with unions and employers in understanding their needs in the creation of our economic plan for the horizon beyond membership of the European single market, by always remaining open to dialogue with our neighbouring nations, but never ourselves giving in to coercion or political blackmail. Because it is by accepting the results that emerge from freely and fairly filled ballot boxes that we believe that we should make decisions, whether in relation to Europe or in relation to sovereignty. But one thing is clear. Although we are leaving the European Union, we should not abandon our European partnerships. An important part of the security of the United Kingdom, and with it Gibraltar, arises from strong partnerships with European allies and others around the world. Leaving the EU must not lead to any compromise in the continued cooperation on matters related to security or law enforcement. Otherwise, the terrorists, the criminals, the fraudsters will win. The evil that these men do will live after them. Those who have worked hard to create partnerships based on cooperation will lose. Let the goodwill they have done in creating such security cooperation not be interred with Brexit. Nights like last night in Manchester require us to avoid that, or we will wake more often to news we would rather not watch. Thank you very much indeed.